atomic gigantification was a sweeping Japan nation when along came a dude with an ultra attitude, a common rider who's the greatest kicker of Japan. And of all, man, life's too short now, baby, to not talk big now, baby.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Kaiju Conversation. I'm your host, Elijah, and joining me, as always, my lovely co-host and editor.
Hello, I'm Rex.
And we are back at it once again.
No way, it's like the weather report.
That was a reference to audio that probably will not see the light of day until Rex catches up on all the bloopers that the show has produced.
Not real.
They're not real at this point.
That's so true.
But we are back at it again
what
for...
bloopers?
They're not real. They don't exist. They can't hurt you.
They can't hurt me.
I feel like they would hurt me more than anything.
Nah, they'd hurt me more. Because I have to go find them.
But we are back at it again here for episode 98.
Ew. Big number.
We're recording the second to, like, this is the second to last 90s episode. There's just one like more that. After this.
I don't like that.
I don't either. It's kind of scary how quickly this is approaching.
Yeah, maybe we should just take a break for like half a year so that we don't get to the big number.
No, because then we'd get behind.
Well, sacrifices have to be made sometimes, you know.
But we are going to take a break after this in terms of our recording. We're going to get a week off.
True. That is very true.
And that week off is actually what I've been up to. But before we talk about what I've been up to, Rex, how have you been, buddy?
Pretty good for the most part. I've been surprisingly busy-ish. Trying to plan out a couple projects I'm working on and also planning out like a little get-together with my boys.
Your
and
boys?
Stuff like that. Yes.
Well, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, it has been. There's probably more that I would have wanted to mention, but I don't remember. So as far as I'm concerned, I guess it didn't happen. How about yourself?
Well, as we mentioned, we're taking a week off because G-Fest, as of this recording, is literally happening this coming week. And so I've been doing my preparations. You know, I'm going to be on 4 panels, so I have to prepare for that, figure out what I'm doing on those panels, what my role in those panels will be. On top of that, I've also had to pack. You know, getting packed, getting all the stuff I need for my meetings that I'm going to be attending, all that good stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
I also went to the hospital.
Oh, that's just a bucket of fun.
Oh, it was. Thought I was having a heart attack.
Jesus.
You know, we made the joke that, like, as soon as, like, my birthday happened, I would, like, start breaking down.
I mean, I just said you were 40.
And, like, within 48 hours of my birthday happening, I'm in the hospital.
He really is a 40-year-old.
Oh, God. Yeah, that happened. It was an experience. The paramedics came at my work. It was embarrassing. There's nothing more embarrassing than collapsing in front of coworkers and customers.
I mean, I can think of things more embarrassing, but I'm not allowed to tell those stories.
I don't know if that's in regards to me or what, but...
That's not in regards to you.
Oh, good. Good.
Those are old film class stories. That's all I can say about that.
I see. But yeah, I had a little health scare, but they say I'm fine. You know, I've drank in the last 6 hours. I've had 3 energy drinks, so whatever chest pains.
I don't think that's helping. I'm going to be honest here.
You know what?
Shocking opinion.
It may be maybe I should just not record at Australian time zones then.
Damn. Maybe we should. Maybe someday we'll figure out
Maybe we should. Hold on. Let's take a look at that. Okay, so perhaps, hypothetically, perhaps the reason that I almost felt like I had a heart attack is because I'm recording at 3 a.m.
I mean, it might also just be due to
You're
the fact
contributing
that
to the death of one Elijah Thomas.
Hey.
You're going to kill me.
Only cause.
How poetic.
Can I put that on my resume?
I was about to say, how poetic is that?
That doesn't answer my question.
What? Serial killer? Murderer? Psychopath? Sociopath?
Well, not in those words.
Narcissist? Sadist?
Narcissism has nothing to do with murder. It's just a motive.
Oh, well. Speaking of narcissism, I do have one good thing that's happened this week. I got confirmation that my Blu-ray copy of Liverleaf has shipped.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that's pretty exciting. And for anybody who doesn't know, which I'm sure there's a few people, Liverleaf is a movie that SRS Cinema put out on Blu-ray, and I got to work on the film. I got to work as the bonus feature producer for it, and so I produced some pretty cool bonus features. I'm pretty excited to get my hands on a copy and see how they turned out. See how everything worked.
I'm pretty excited to get a copy and watch anything that doesn't have my voice on it.
How many did you do? I'm trying to remember. Did you do 2 or was it just one?
I did 2. I did 2.
I feel like you did 2. I think I did 2.
Manga to movie, and then I did
the Oshikiri biography. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I did like an introduction to the film.
So yeah, thanks for reminding me which one's on mine, so I can not watch them.
And
sorry
then,
that your and my hard work goes to waste and all, but it happens.
You're pulling a Johnny Depp.
I don't understand that reference. I'm sorry.
Oh, Johnny Depp refuses to watch anything he's in.
Oh, fair enough. I understand. I mean, a lot of actors do that actually, or they just don't pay attention to their parts. They just cringe at their parts or something like that.
Yeah. See, I used to be that way. Perhaps my ego has gotten bigger.
Yeah, the narcissism has just really exploded, you could say.
Yeah. But I used to not even be able to listen to my own audio. I couldn't watch myself. I couldn't listen to myself. I
can watch and listen to myself in editing, but when I'm not editing, I hate it.
I mean, we're literally talking about the person right now who, when he needs help going to sleep, pulls up Kaiju Conversation and just listens to himself.
Yeah, I think
talk.
You might just be a weirdo. I'm going to be honest here.
David Lynch moment?
But you're not funny like David Lynch.
I know, I'm just funny looking. Why are we even talking about David Lynch? I'm trying to remember how we got onto this topic.
We just keep bringing up David Lynch.
No, we
don't know why.
We haven't brought him up in a single podcast before this.
No, I mean today. We just keep bringing him up today for some reason. I don't know why.
We started talking 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
You don't make sense.
Okay. Cool, bro.
But speaking of not making sense, sometimes we watch stuff that doesn't make sense. And a lot of times we watch Tokusatsu. Rex, have you watched any Tokusatsu this week?
That's hilarious.
Why is that?
I watched one Tokusatsu movie and one Tokusatsu related movie, but I can't talk about them yet until we get onto our main topic.
Are you telling me that you and I both, as what seems to be a constant issue now, We're unable to watch
for
any
what it's
tokusatsu.
worth, thanks to rewatching this certain top film that today's episode is about, I will probably finally get around to watching its 2 sequels, either next week or the week after.
It only took you so long.
I've had the Blu-ray set for about 3 years. I've only watched the first film once, none of the sequels. Never popped them in for some reason.
Well, what are we even talking about? Like, I'm going to be honest with you. We're recording this one kind of late, and, between work and G-Fest and our mix-up with schedules, I don't even know what we're talking about.
Well, there's a little film with a giant Marchand, you could say.
Oh? A Marchand?
You could almost call it Daimajin.
That dude from the Great Yokai. Are we covering the Great Yokai War Guardians?
No.
Oh.
Think older.
Are we covering Pulgasari?
Think older.
Are we covering Bulgasari?
A little younger. And Japanese.
Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla.
This is exactly what I mean when I say you're not the weird funny of David Lynch.
What do you mean by I might be stupid, Rex?
We're talking about the 1966 film, Daimajin.
Oh, the Great Devil!
Yeah, or Marchand, the Monster of Terror, and various other titles.
Too many to count. It's
There's
funny.
Like 6 or 7.
Yeah,
it's in English.
It's funny that we're talking about Daimajin when we just covered Gamera vs. Barugon, the film that came out the same day as Daimajin on a double feature with it.
Right, and which's origin is kind of tied to Daimajin as well.
Right. So, for anybody who wants to know, for this episode, we're not really going to cover the development of the film in that regards, because we already did. If you want to listen to that, go listen to our Gamera vs. Barugon episode, which was episode 96.
Yeah.
It just came out, so very timely, and it probably will it's a good double feature, you could say.
Although something interesting from that I don't believe we mentioned in that episode, but from the sounds of it, it's kind of weird because Daimajin's planning sounds like it actually started before Gamera even came out, technically.
Really?
Yes, because apparently the proposal was submitted to Daiei's headquarters at the 124th planning meeting, which occurred in early November of 1965. Gamera having come out, I want to say, at the end of November.
Really?
As far as I could tell. I might double check that just to make sure I wasn't confusing the English.
Yeah, November 27th. Yeah, November 27th, it came out in Japan. I didn't even put 2 and 2 together. That's actually... So they must have been planning a sequel to Gamera by that point?
I'm not entirely sure. I don't know. That's the thing with a lot of these movies. There's some conflicting information.
Right, because most sources say that the development of Daimajin came from the original draft for the Gamera sequel.
Right, but yeah, I don't think that, as far as I'm aware, I don't think it's the Gamera sequel. I don't think there's actually dates for like when Gamera versus the Ice Giant was submitted. It presumably could have been this meeting. Maybe. I mean, Dai is good at pumping out sequels very quickly, so maybe they were kind of just already like on the grind of being like, hey, let's watch this in case this is a hit. But then again, from what I understand, they also weren't really, they were kind of expecting Gamera to flop, so
right.
So I'm not entirely sure. Or maybe I guess it's also possible that perhaps like the idea of making a film kind of inspired by what we're about to talk about, the Golem legend, perhaps that was what first came about. And then, you know, when Barugon's when the Ice Giant script story was submitted to them, they kind of took a couple ideas from that and then just threw it into this Daimajin project, and it evolved from there. Perhaps, I'm not entirely sure. It's a little unclear from what I was able to find.
Well, I do know that for Daimajin, the storyboards and final draft of the script were done in December of 65, with the filming script ready January of 1966.
Okay.
So,
I mean, no matter what, it's a fast turnaround either way.
Right. Oh, yeah, no, Daimajin is one of those films that, or just the franchise in general, is proof of, like, development, like, on a fast pace.
I mean, especially when you consider, like, I didn't get a date on when filming started, but I know filming ended. The last shot of the film from the special effects unit, or not even, it was one unit, sorry. The last shot of the film was finished on April 8th, just about 9 days before release, 5 days before the staff screening.
Right, because they spent 20 days of working with the projector screen, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And they filmed, like, the live action stuff. All of that was April 10th. I got April 10th.
Was that for, like, was that including
live
stuff
action
for the actors?
Yeah, that was the live action non-special effects stuff was February 3rd.
Well, it was one unit. It wasn't two units like
right.
what you'd see in Toho films or even Gamera.
But they filmed them separately.
But yeah, still, that turnaround is pretty crazy.
Right, and actually Daimajin had a huge budget as well. It had a budget
it's bigger than Barugon's.
Yeah, it had
about 100 million yen.
Which, if you convert that into modern day yen and then convert that to US dollar, that in 2024 USD, that would be $2,688,455.10. They actually bought what at that time was the largest blue screen in Japan as well, which I think is really cool. 11 by 4.6 meters.
Yeah, and they had like a setup of like about 190 light bulbs arranged so that they could light it evenly.
No, this film very clearly has a lot of people behind it that know what they're doing.
Right. And they wanted to push the bounds as well to make a really good and realistic looking film with really impressive effects that it isn't obvious when it's going between effects shots and just drama shots. Like, I know the effects director pointed out, like, the Godzilla series, sometimes you could tell in the original when it was a drama filmed by the drama team and when it was filmed by the effects team. They wanted specifically to avoid that, so they ended up having it so that it was just one crew, essentially. The people who would do all the building for sets on the drama unit would also build the miniature effects, and it'd be the same cinematographer for what would typically be the drama stuff and the special effects stuff, etc., etc.
See, it's funny that they voice that issue because if you remember correctly, in our Gamera versus Barugon episode, I literally said the film feels like the two teams are too far apart. Like it doesn't feel seamless.
Right. Which, this film very much, I would say, does not have that issue.
Right. And the reason now, while it is a Dai film, both are Dai films, they are different studios. The Gamera franchise and The Whale God were filmed at Dai Tokyo, whereas the Daimajin films and the Yokai Monster trilogy was filmed at Dai Kyoto, which Dai Kyoto was the company that worked on period dramas. Some of the films they worked on were like Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon, or Ugetsu, Gate of Hell, Sancho the Bailiff, or 1961's Buddha.
Not to mention the Zatoichi series.
Right. They were, and I found it interesting, they actually were very competitive, not against like Toho or Shochiku, while they were, but they were mostly competitive with just Dai Tokyo. They just wanted to be better than their rival.
Almost kind of reminds me of the story of the original Dracula, where you've got like the English crew and then you've got the Spanish crew that just really wanted to do the film better than the English crew.
That's right. Yeah, I actually just watched the Spanish version of Dracula and I kind of got that story and I thought that was really, really funny.
I still need to watch it.
Now, for the last few episodes, we've been able to get a look into some of the interesting aspects of Dai's history. For Gamera versus Barugon, we learned about how Golden Week was a Dai idea. And then for the Whale God, we learned about the Dai special effects establishment and whatnot. And even outside of that, there was a couple other things I did a little deep dive into Dai about. For this recording, I thought it would be interesting to dive into where Dai Kyoto came from. So this was also where I can also provide some context to why last week I brought up how there was the five company agreement, right? Which was, each studio has their own actors and artists. You can't use the same ones. And that was because Nikkatsu had came back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know why Nikkatsu had to, quote, come back, end quote?
I don't believe so.
It's because Nikkatsu by law was required to shut down. So, interestingly enough, Dai Kyoto started as Nikkatsu. It started in 1927 under the name Nikkatsu Uzumasa Studio, which it was one of the three Kyoto branches of Nikkatsu. You had Kasane, Taishogun, and Uzumasa. And then Nikkatsu had three other branches in Tokyo, Mukojima, Tamagawa, and Chofu, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uzumasa, which became Dai Kyoto, opened in 1927 simply because the Taishogun studio got destroyed in the Great Kanto earthquake, September 1st of 1923. So it took them 4 years to construct the new studio, and once they did, they shut down what remained of the old one. So that's where it actually came from. And funny enough, following the war starting in the 40s, the Japanese cabinet required small businesses to reform in like restructure them. So they would require, instead of having three small businesses, they told them that they would be one big business.
Mm-hmm.
And it just so happened Nikkatsu was one of three companies that were film companies that had to become one. You had the Shinko Kinema, Daito Eiga, and Nikkatsu. Sorry, I can't speak for some reason. These three companies had to form into one, and they became the Dai Nippon Eiga Seisakusho. Now, they weren't really supposed to even exist. They weren't actually, they were basically going to shut them down. They weren't going to let them exist. But Nagata-san, who we've talked about, the president of Daiei, even though we know that as time went on, he kind of personally destroyed the company, he actually went to the cabinet, to the Diet, and he proposed a control company that would support the government and would be like the government's company in terms of filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, he actually got the government to agree and create an allowed third company to exist. So during the wartime, you had Toho, Shochiku, and Dai Nippon Eiga, which I think is pretty cool, kind of knowing that background. So then with Dai Nippon, they ended up establishing 6 branches, and as time would go on, they would consolidate that into Daiei Kyoto, Daiei Kyoto 2, and Daiei Tokyo. And then in 1945, they would rename the entire company to Daiei. And so from there, we got what we know as Daiei. From that point on, they were one of the major film companies. And then Nikkatsu, of course, came back in 1952. So then you had Toei, Daiei, Nikkatsu, Toho, and Shochiku, your big 5. So there's kind of a bit of a history for how Daiei came to existing.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a weekly little bit of Daiei history.
You could call it Daistory. Ha, ha.
No,
ha. Oh.
I refuse.
That was a bad joke.
Yeah, you're not David Lynch.
Honestly, I will say this, by the end of this month, I think we should know enough about Daiei that we'll be able to, teach people on what Daiei was.
Man, and the best part is we're not even getting into all the crazy stuff about Daiei that happens in, the late 60s and 70s.
Right, no, we haven't even got to that point yet. We're still on the founding and the establishments.
We're in the golden years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suppose one thing we should bring up is that... So I brought up earlier that the film, that it was kind of proposed to be inspired by the Gollum legend and a film from 1936, a Czech film called The Gollum, or Le Gollum, directed by Julien Duvivier. I probably butchered that horrifically.
Yeah, and actually the whole background to that was from Shosei Suzuki, the head of Daiei Kyoto.
Akinari Suzuki. That's what the Aeroset calls him.
See, in my research, he came up as Shosei Suzuki.
I don't know, I'm a bit more willing to trust the Aeroset, because when it came up as Shosei for me, that was Google Translate, and Google Translate is bad when it comes to kanji names.
Suzuki-san, then.
I'm pretty sure it's Akinari, because the thing with kanji is that names it's kind of whatever kanji you feel like using, unless it's Tanaka-san. Yeah, and so it's often said that this film mildly influenced Daimajin, but ultimately most sources don't really tell you anything beyond that.
Right, because... And, I say this because I've read the Daiei Special Effects Daimajin book, which seems to be one of the best sources of information for the Showa films in terms of information. And in that, and what you see republished everywhere, is Suzuki-san mentioned that he wanted to take influence of the Golem from Le Golem 1936. And that's where it ends. That's the statement, and they move on.
Right.
But it's... So, Rex, you and I... Well, I guess... So, for this episode, I got a little curious, because I was like, what is this movie?
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to track down a copy of it. And the reason why we're late in recording is because we ended up watching the film together.
Right. Technically twice.
Quite, yeah. One with subtitles, one without subtitles.
One without subtitles, one with half subtitles, more accurately.
So the film is called Le Golem, or The Golem, or just simply Golem. It came out February 14th of 1936. It is the fourth film in a series, but not really.
Mm-hmm.
So there are 3 German films. One's called Der Golem, which is The Golem from 1915, which is a partially lost, mostly lost German film. Then there's The Golem and the Dancing Girl from 1917, which is a lost film. And then The Golem, How He Came into the World, 1920, which is available in its entirety in full HD. I think it even has a 4K transfer from Kino Lorber.
Mm.
It's all loosely based on the novel The Golem, but not really. Now, funny enough, H.P. Lovecraft actually loves the book The Golem. He said it was one of the best examples of Jewish folklore. But this film, or the set of films, these 3 and Le Golem, are inspired by the Jewish folklore story of the Golem, right? And they were all directed by Paul Wagner. He also would act in all of them. He played the Golem itself. He would direct all 3 of these films, and one of his co-writers and co-directors, Henrik Galeen, would go on to do Nosferatu and Waxworks, very popular German films of the 1920s and 1930s. Now, for Le Golem, it's a French film. It's all in French. Based off of the research I found, it's based on a play called Golem. That script was written by Jiří Voskov and Jan Rausch, but the director, Julien Duvier, rejected that script and ended up writing his own, but using elements of that script without crediting them, so there ended up being a lawsuit after the film came out, which is kind of funny.
Oopsie.
And it is, as you would expect, not official. It's like how there's movies that are like...
It's like Alien 2 on Earth.
Yeah, or Zombie 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was produced by AB Productions, and it's quite the interesting film. There's actually multiple versions of it. There's a British cut, which is 83 minutes long. It came out in 1937. Another British cut that was retitled The Legend of Prague, which is 70 minutes, that came out in 1938. And then it actually got a U.S. release under the title The Man of Stone in the 1940s, but it only came to the West in 8mm and 16mm, so it was silent. It was only 3 minutes long. It wasn't anything too crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the original film is supposed to be about 90 to 100 minutes. So even the version we watched is not the full version.
Right, because we watched the 85-minute version, and yeah, when we watched it, you could definitely tell there was a lot of missing footage and just dropped frames from the transfer we watched.
Yeah. It just kind of jumped around. The dialogue.
Absolutely.
The dialogue was something.
Yeah.
So when you and I watched it the first time, you weren't as up to speed with how much I was reading into the film, but I think by the second viewing,
because I didn't have much of any clue what was actually happening, so it was a little difficult to piece together. Oh, what is similar to Daimajin here up until the end where the rampage happens.
Right. So it's very interesting. So do we want to talk about the similarities that Le Golem has to Daimajin?
I mean, the general idea of the film is that it's a period piece with where this group of people, this population in this city are being oppressed by a dictator, and Daimajin, or the Golem, is used to help liberate the people. Like, those are the broad strokes that are you can very clearly see in both films.
Right. And that's something that immediately already shook me up, because it was like, wait a minute. In its basic sense, these films are the same. Like, in its most basic,
they're definitely exploring different themes and similar themes and ideas, and just, I mean, Akira Ifukube. There's an interview with Ifukube where he states that it was kind of explained to him that that Daimajin was essentially Le Golem, but set in Japan, which really is kind of how it is. It's that concept of Le Golem, this period piece about oppression, transpose it into a period piece in the Sengoku period of Japan.
Right. Yeah, because like
with a more Japanese interpretation of the Golem,
right,
rather than being the Jewish folklore entity,
right. Which to me makes me wonder if some of the Christian images in Daimajin are some of that bleed over from Le Golem.
I don't know if it's necessarily intentional. I don't know.
Because there is crucifixions, crosses do appear, and they even use the term in the film Kamisama, which translates to Christian God. At the beginning of this film specifically, they mention that the Christian God watches over the valley and prevents evil from entering.
I mean, this was during the Sengoku period, which, from what I understand, was kind of when there was Christian influence in Japan.
Right. So it could perhaps be a blend of both, or just one or the other, but I think it's very interesting that it is there with this added background. Some other things that kind of show up, well, not kind of, that do show up in Le Golem that are in Daimajin. Both films start off with a worshipping at a sacred place. For Daimajin, it's a prayer festival to appease the god. In Le Golem, it's a synagogue where people are praying about, I believe it's the death of the rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that both share is in Daimajin, the evil lord sends his men out to find the Daimajin statue and destroy it.
Right, and on that note, there are a handful of characters in Le Golem which you can kind of find rough, not one-to-one, but rough equivalents to in Daimajin, such as the dictators in both films being Rudolph II in Le Golem, and Samanosuke Odate in Daimajin. Daimajin has a character named Gunjiro who can be connected to the Chancellor Lang in Le Golem, etc., etc.
Our priest in Le Golem, Jacob, kind of fills both of our main characters in Daimajin's role.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so there's absolutely some bleed over there,
Right. And while I don't necessarily think it's all intentional, you could definitely see similarities.
I feel like it was intentional. I'll get to that here in a second. So another thing is when both of the men from the evil emperor or lord go to find the golem or the Daimajin, bad things happen to the men. In Le Golem, a couple of rocks fall and hit a couple of the men. In Daimajin, we have a whole sequence where all the men get swallowed up by the earth.
Mm-hmm.
The eyes of Legolem are very prominently displayed in the shots that have Legolem in it. Just as in Daimajin, those eyes are prominently displayed. It makes me wonder if that was like some direct influence there. They do try to destroy the golem in Legolem, just as they do in Daimajin, and it fails. Just as before they can destroy the statue, it comes to life and goes on its rampage. There's, the removing of the rights of the people in Legolem. The Emperor takes away a lot of rights and basically makes it so if you are remotely involved, you will die, which is something we see in Daimajin as well. There's public executions at the end of the film with our main characters that Daimajin and Legolem stop from occurring. In both films, the side female character, is the one to bring the character to life. And, the Golem and Daimajin both kill the villains of the story. Actually, both of them kill one of the villains by stepping on him.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thing that I was like, okay, we're done. Well, the whole rampage, the Golem shows up in the last 10 minutes, just as Daimajin does. And the very end, Rex, what happens at the end of Legolem?
Oh, he crumbles. Very similar to Daimajin.
So the influences here are basically impossible to ignore.
I definitely see a lot of it there, but I'm not entirely convinced all of it is intentional. Some of it could just be they had the general... I feel like it's more they just took the general idea of Legolem about this story of oppression with this golem statue and having it set in a period piece. And I feel like that is the main thing that actually came from Legolem. Everything else is kind of, maybe it was legitimately lifted from this. Maybe it was just a coincidence. I mean, in the case of Daimajin appearing in the last 15-ish minutes, in the Golem, in that case, from what I understand, that was mainly just because the crew, they wanted to make something that it wasn't necessarily meant as a film directed specifically towards adults. It was one that could be enjoyed by adults. They did not want a special effects led film. They just wanted to save it for the back half. According to, I want to say it was special effects director Kuroda.
See, I would agree with you if it wasn't for the fact that Legolem is actually one of the few German expressionism films that got a Japanese release. It was released in Japan.
From what I understand, also some of the previous Golem films did also get Japanese releases.
I think, but not by this company. So, Legolem was released in Japan July of 1937. It was distributed by Towa Shoji that would end up becoming Toho Towa in 1958. Its main business was importing foreign films primarily focused on European films from Germany. They actually ended up working on the very first German-Japan co-production in 1937 as well, that Eiji Tsuburaya helped with.
Mm-hmm.
Legolem was the 17th film distributed by this company. They were founded in 1928. As time has gone on, they would end up distributing films like King Kong 1976, Orca, The Great Wall, the 2016 film, and 10 Cloverfield Lane. In Japan, it was released as Kyojin Gorumu, or Giant Golem. Now, the reason I bring up all of this is before the head of Daikyoto, Suzuki-san, before he worked in the film industry, he was a film journalist. He wrote reviews for movies. And when you look at how old he would have been about of age in 1937 to be writing reviews on films. So I have a strong suspicion that Suzuki actually saw this film during his film journalist time, and that's why he knew to directly call back to it. And I think I have the suspicion, here's my crackpot cuckoo theories, that he's the reason that the film ended up being the way it is. And I think the similarities are more than just a coincidence. Once is a coincidence, twice is an accident, 3 times is a pattern. I have a whole page here of things that happened in both films that are the same. It's the best way I can describe it is it's the hidden fortress to Star Wars, but for Daimajin.
Oh, I do 100% agree with that comparison. I think that's probably the most apt way to describe it, where it's not one-to-one, but there's very obvious influence throughout, I'd say.
And I do agree with the idea of it's Legolem, but with a Japanese twist, because there are obvious Japanese influences here, right? In the film, they literally call the Majin a kami, which is a god from Shinto beliefs. And a kami possesses 2 souls. If you look into it, they have one gentle side and one assertive or angry side, something that Daimajin very clearly has. They're not visible to the human eye unless they possess sacred places, natural phenomenon, or people during rituals, which makes me question if the reason that Daimajin is a statue is because maybe the statue, which is modeled after a Haniwa armored warrior statue, is a sacred totem for a burial, because that's what those would be used for. They were placed by tombs made of clay, which makes me wonder if Daimajin was a giant Haniwa statue and he was there for a specific reason. And it just so happens that Kami possessed that statue.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even regardless, like it's very... Daimajin takes the idea and adds a new aspect to the story of Legolem with the whole coup aspect of much of this film's first act, and a lot of, and just some of the character relations with the children of the Lord at the beginning of the film,
right? Because
it's a Chanbara film as well.
Right. Yeah, because the thing about Legolem is it's very much there's some, specifically with our antagonist in Legolem, there is a lot of like tension because he's kind of going crazy too.
Oh, the
Emperor Rudolph II.
Yeah.
By the end of the film, he's just kind of this drunk, laughing mess, which you could, in theory, assume that's power gets to the head and then you kind of go crazy, which we do see that slightly in Daimajin, but it's nowhere near to the sheer levels that, Legolem does.
Right.
I will say this. It's kind of like when I saw Hontoni Ato no Kawaii Hanashi, and I saw one of the episodes that's Scary True Stories. And in one of the episodes of Scary True Stories, we see elements of what would become Pulse, the Kiyoshi Kurosawa film from 2005, Pulse, Cairo. We see direct resemblance and legitimate frame for frame repeats. Mm-hmm. And in a way, it kind of disappoints me to see stuff like that. And perhaps you can kind of agree with me here. It's weird to see like in Pulse, the sequence that I'm specifically talking about is the Red Room sequence. Horrifying, absolutely horrifying. The best sequence in that movie, come to find out, is just taken straight from a TV show from the 90s.
See, in Daimajin's case, I don't think it's disappointing because I feel like Daimajin is a different enough story. It takes the general concept of Legolem but is its own film.
I will say this, because the thing about Legolem is, and perhaps it's because half the subtitles we didn't know what they were saying, but it did feel like Legolem was a lot slower and had some more pacing issues in contrast to Daimajin, that is a very easy breeze watch. Like, I would absolutely agree with the statement that Daimajin is the better version of this film.
I mean, honestly, that second watch was just so much better because I was dying during that first watch where we didn't understand anything.
Yeah.
It felt like it was going on forever. Whereas the second watch, it actually felt like it was, because I could actually understand what was happening, I could actually follow along. So it didn't just feel like I was staring at paint drying if it moved.
Right. See, I would really love to see Legolem get, like, because what we watched was a VHS transfer from like a Spanish tape.
Yeah, something like that.
I would love to see that get remastered and like fully subtitled. I feel like that would be such a cool film to watch with knowing the added context now. I really wish we could see it in its entirety fully restored with proper subtitles.
Right, but with how old it is, you gotta raises the question on, does, like, say, a lot of the footage that has been dropped over the years in different versions, how much of that still exists today from the original cut?
Right. And I know there's, from what I could tell, there's ways
and
to get it.
how's the condition as well.
Right. There are, like, ways to get it, not officially, of course, but from what I was able to find out, there are ways to get it. I just don't know how well, like, those transfers are. So that's something I'm curious. I would be curious to see, like, how those transfers look.
Right. But yeah, so outside of that, is there anything else in particular to mention before we get into the film? I don't know, I almost feel like we're speeding along.
I do feel like we're flying through this.
I mean, I don't mind, but it almost feels like that.
I mean, if you're ready, I guess we could dive into the film itself.
Sounds wonderful.
Because right off the bat, we get the Dai logo and very obvious Ifukube music, which...
Yeah, it's very Ifukube.
Yeah. This is more Ifukube than the Whale God.
Yeah, there's a lot of... You can hear, like, motifs from the Godzilla series in this. Even though Ifukube... I believe one of his primary directives was to stray away from those Godzilla themes and music, but no, you can definitely hear them in the film throughout.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah, and as soon as like the Dai logo goes, we get some opening credits and it just moves on. Like, this film is very quick with its stuff. It doesn't linger on anything, and I think that's something that helps it out a lot, especially for when you consider Daimajin's only in the film for about 10 minutes max.
Right, but this is a pretty short film. It's only about 85 minutes.
Right.
Or less even.
But one thing I do love is this film does not shy away from eerie cinematography, and as soon as these credits are done, we get like this eyeball that just shows up on the side of the mountain and then slowly shrinks and disappears.
Right, and then we get a bunch of these pretty beautiful and eerie establishing shots of the forest and the general locale till we get to the village.
Right, and that's something that I actually noted was this film really feels like, while it's a kaiju film, right? Kaiju, tokusatsu, it also very easily falls into J-horror of the time. It very easily is a Chanbara film. It's very easily a Jidaigeki film. This is one of, I think, the best examples of how the kaiju genre can kind of articulate itself and blend into other genres to make something interesting.
Yeah, and just on that note of the gothic atmosphere, this film is really quite beautiful looking for like pretty much everything. The only flaws I feel like this film has visually is there's a couple unfortunately, a couple of the blue screen effects are a bit rough in HD transfers.
Right. But one thing, it's interesting because both Gamera versus Barugon and Daimajin did a great job. Now, with Barugon, it was more of the human camera work, I would say. But both do a great job with their cinematography and their lighting. Both of them feel like they're being directed by seasoned professionals that know what they're doing.
Right. I mean, on that lighting, one thing I really appreciated about Daimajin, especially getting a bit ahead of it myself here, but especially at the end of the film during the main part of Daimajin's rampage, it's the background. There's a lot of like these red skies and this cloudy red sky, and it's very painting like.
Yes.
A lot of the climax, and it's really beautiful. It kind of adds to this sort of element that Daimajin feels like a folk legend, the way the story is told.
And, speaking of that, kind of jumping us back into the opening here, the film, when we get past our credits and these establishing shots, opens with some villagers being fearful of the sounds of footsteps and the shaking of the earth, which some people have said, oh, maybe, watching this for the first time, you would think, oh, it's an earthquake, but no, it's the Majin, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, they do directly state that it is Daimajin in the dialogue.
But what I love is these aren't just any villagers. We come back to these characters in the film later on, and I didn't even see.
One of them is a central character here.
Yeah, and nobody really talks about that. How we start off with these three, and they are relevant to the story. They're not just random villagers that just disappear again.
Oh, is Motsuki right, because isn't it Motsuki at the beginning as well, and his wife and the grandfathers?
Yes.
Oh my god!
You fell for that too.
Yeah, no, literally.
Like, that's such a cool, and I think almost blink and you'll miss it moment is like, these are these same characters. Like, we watch this family go from being together to falling apart.
Honestly, you mentioning that, I genuinely did not realize until you've mentioned it now that it's those characters that appear at the beginning. I didn't even realize.
And now you learn something new. Yeah, I really love that. And I think this opening is genius. Like, this really establishes just the power of fear that Majin has over the town as well.
Right.
Also, it's important to note, for some reason, they call Majin at some points Arakatsuma.
I mean, from what I understand, that's its actual name. Daimajin isn't the name of this individual, like, god. Arakatsuma, I believe, is the actual name of this one.
Gotcha.
Because Majin, is just a type of demonic spirit in Japan.
Right.
And when they call it Majin, if I recall right, it's stated in the film that Majin is referring to the being, is the god inside the armor.
Yeah, so the way it's kind of described, which is why the Kami thing's a little interesting, is there is a god inside that the statue is protecting from getting out.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so is it two beings in one?
I'm pretty sure it's kind of implied in dialogue that the statue over it is like a protector god. That's how I was understanding it, at least.
Mm-hmm. It just doesn't make sense when you look into like what a kami is and like what the because the statue is like I said, it's literally a Haniwa armored warrior statue. Like it's
especially when it's in the Bunsho form.
Yes.
Or Bujin form, sorry.
So I really struggle to understand exactly what the...
I want to say Bujin is a type of god, because it's like in some of the behind the scenes, they talk about how there were 2 suits for each form. So there's the Margin form, which is when he goes on a rampage, but there's also the Bujin form, which is before he does like the face switch.
Right.
So I guess the Bujin is perhaps that god, that protector god, I suppose. If anyone's listening who knows more about Kami and the folklore that inspires the film, please let us know. I'm actually legitimately curious. I'm legitimately interested in learning more about this.
Right, because I know very little about Kami. What little I do know is like Kami makes up everything. Like there's a Kami for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different types of Kami. This one would
a kitsune is a type of Kami.
Right. This Kami, from my understanding, would be an earthly Kami because it's on Earth. You have like heavenly Kami, which is like the parents of all the other Kami because they all come from the same 2. So it's a whole thing that I have a very basic grasp of, and yeah, I would love to learn the folklore behind this. Because here's the thing though, when they made it, they specifically said they were doing something that wasn't based in reality. They wanted it to look real.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted it to feel real, but they didn't want it to be real.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's why we're kind of caught up here. Is like, okay, so on one hand, it follows this, but it also doesn't follow this. Why is it called this? Why is it not called this?
Right. I mean, for the purposes of the film by itself, I think regardless, the story just works, even if you're not terribly familiar with Japanese culture. Like, I feel like the story of the film is fairly simple and easy to digest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. And, I think the film does a great job at setting up the villain or the Daimajin almost as kind of a Western character. At certain points, it felt very wizardy or something that would make sense in a Western magical story. Does that make sense?
I don't know. I didn't particularly think of that when I was watching the film. The most I can think of in terms of Western influence in Daimajin is just that I want to say one of the special effects director or someone mentioned that the face was inspired by Kirk Douglas.
Yeah, that's really funny. There's a lot of info about the special effects of this film, but not a lot on the background of it, which I thought was interesting.
Right. But yeah, going back into the film, during this festival event, we are introduced to the lord of the village and his family, whom he tries to send a representative of his to the festival to, just for their representation and to show their support of the event. But this representative of his ends up leading a coup.
Now, it's important to note that he himself does not really believe in the whole Daimajin thing.
No, but he still allows them religious freedom.
Right, which I think is very interesting. And I think that really does help set up, this is a film where the world feels lived in, right? Going back to kind of our Ultraman Rising episode, you're kind of thrown in. You just you're rolling with it, right? This film does a really good job at setting up why I should care about a character right before it kills them. Because like you said there, Samanosuke leads a coup against the Hanabusa clan. And before we even see that coup, we see why Hanabusa's a good lord. He's letting his people, have that religious freedom. And he says, we need to go support them, go to the festival. And I think that's a great way to add a level of humanity to a character that becomes irrelevant after the 5-minute mark.
Right. Yeah, because the film is the setup of this film happens very quickly with this coup. Samanosuke leads the charge in murdering his Lord Hanabusa, and a servant of a vassal of the Lord named Kogenta helps the kids escape.
And I will say this all happens within 14 minutes of the film opening. So you get your credits, you get the Daimajin establishments, and then you get this coup and the festival all kind of within 14 minutes.
Right, it's a very efficient script.
And I could see why somebody would be like, oh no, you guys have moved past the main issue so fast. You still have 60 minutes left of your runtime. Are you going to slow down? But I think this film does a great job at not letting it slow down. I think the pace is generally the pace is very consistent for the most part. And that's something that a film like Gamera versus Barugon to me didn't have. So this is a really refreshing script.
See, I disagree. I think Barugon's pace is relatively consistent. It's just that some of the kaiju sequences are less interesting and engaging as the drama unit scenes.
Mm. Now, during the whole coup, Kogenta gets Tadafume and Kozasa out of the house and gets them out.
The Lord Hanabusa's children.
Yes. Now, they end up in a stable with a couple other members of the Hanabusa clan. And our villains throw torches at the stable to burn it down. Now, during this, we do get some music that I would recognize from Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2 and Godzilla versus King Ghidorah. But it actually came from A Prayer to the Rolling Thunder from King Kong versus Godzilla.
Right.
But it's also just a banger of a track. I love this song.
Yeah. Yeah. After escaping, they go meet up with Kogenta's aunt, who is actually the priestess from an earlier scene.
Also,
with the villagers.
in her little, what would that be? Temple? Is that a temple? Is that a shrine? Would that be a shrine?
I thought it was just a house she was in.
We'll call it a house. You actually see one of those clay statues I was talking about earlier. They actually cut
the Haniwa statues?
Yes, they actually sit on it for a little bit and then they cut away, which I thought was a cool little nod, not only to Daimajin itself, but the statues as well.
I don't entirely recall, but alas, after the sequence and after Samanosuke's soldiers try to go investigating for the kids, the priestess decides that Kogenta and the children have no choice but to reside in the mountain where the statue of Daimajin remains.
Right, and during all of this, we get some beautiful, and this is not the only time, anytime we're outside and we're not on location, it is beautiful. I love the look of, these Japanese films doing these foresty, woodsy sound stages, because it just looks so beautiful. It's so detailed all the time. And these outside sets are so lavishing. I love them.
I mean, this whole mountain set is gorgeous.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
It's genuinely gorgeous.
Yeah, no, I even once they go into the cave with the cave paintings, everything about this and the framing, the cinematography is just a whole nother level here.
Oh, the framing is almost every shot just looks fantastic.
Mm-hmm. This is one of those films where you can tell that each shot they actually contemplated and debated what they needed to do.
Well, I was reading about, so a little bit prior to this, Daiei did a film called... They worked on a film with some American actors and crew called The Flight from Machida. Mm-hmm. And it actually had quite a fair bit of the crew from Daimajin, such as the cinematographer, and I want to say the special effects director.
Yes.
I could be wrong. But that film, I remember reading that some of the American crew members were shocked because where film as a resource they have a lot more of in America. So for a lot of the films that they do, they'd shoot more takes from various different angles than in Japanese films, where it was often, since film was a lot more precious of a resource, they'd only shoot what they needed, and there was a lot more careful planning into it and just like more deliberate decision making into the framing and aspects like that, where American films, there was a lot less specific planning for that. They'd kind of just go through what they have and see what looked good and then use that.
Right. Yeah. It comes down to the whole, and this is something like in film school they talk about, it's the whole like, why did you make this shot the way it is? You know, is there a thought process behind it? Technically speaking, if you're being tested, yes, you should always have a thought process for what you're filming and have reasoning for it, and like, you know, have a whole reason and thought process behind it, and not just whatever looks good.
Mm-hmm. I mean, rule of cool is important, but I think planning clearly as in here, yeah, absolutely. It really pays off.
And now to move on, the film legitimately does a whole 10-year time jump.
Yeah, where we're reintroduced to Princess Kozasa and her brother as pretty much 18-year-olds, I want to say. They were.
Yes. Tadafume himself is turning 18, which is something that Samanosuke actually is worried about because, and you know, if you've watched enough Chambara films, you know, like the heir to the throne who got overtaken, the moment they turn 18, their right is to have the throne. So the evil guy.
I mean, even not in Chambara films, that's kind of a trope in a lot of these type stories, where there's like a lord or a king or what have you that gets overthrown. Right. And so, you know, it's I one think of the Lion King.
I thought of the Princess Blade. It's the same thought process, is it not?
Not quite. Similar, whatever.
Isn't it? She's turned the age that she needs to be to take over.
I'm going to be honest, I only have a very vague recollection.
I'm pretty sure it is.
See, I remember them mentioning something about that, but I don't remember any of the other context around it.
Yeah, I'd like to forget that movie. But we do get, speaking of forgetting that movie, we do continue on with Daimajin, and we get an interesting, I will say the setup here is a little underwhelming. So like they've been able to successfully hide out for 10 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they learn that, correct me if I'm wrong here, but they learn that it's getting worse. And so Kogenta goes down to get some allies to start planning basically a coup on the coup, right?
Right, because, I mean, the film takes us to see the village where we meet up with the villagers at the beginning, Motsuki and his family, whom are being slaved away. Well, Motsuki is slaving away alongside other villagers to create a new gate for the village. So much, and it's such a brutal regime that he's not even allowed to visit his dying wife.
Right. And, you know, just like in Godzilla Kong the New Empire, like if anybody like trips or falls or like they mess up, like it's an automatic, like you're getting beat.
I hate to admit that I thought of Scar King's throne in this scene, mainly when they were carrying the boulders.
Right, yeah. And so, yeah, it's a pretty awful sequence. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that leads to our child in this film going to the priest's house where he tells her this, and that's where we learn. No, that's later on in the film. That's where we learn Kogenta's.
Well, that's when his father goes on trial for helping Tadafumi a bit later.
Not Tadafumi.
Accidentally.
Kogenta.
Oh no, you're right. You're right. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah, because once Kogenta goes down, he's supposed to bring back people, allies. He goes into town planning to give the Lord these birds he has hunted, but it just so happens that Samanosuke recognizes him.
Gunjiro recognizes him, not Samanosuke.
Oh, that's right.
But Gunjiro is basically Samanosuke's right-hand man.
Right. And they go after Kogenta, and this is where we get the reveal of they now have guns, which I thought was a very interesting inclusion, having the gun.
I mean, it is around that time where guns were introduced. I didn't end up thinking too much of it.
Right. But he runs off. He ends up going into the village where some of the villagers, to me, it looked like it was an accidental assist.
Yeah, it was more incidental than intentional.
But they do end up getting arrested for it. And
right.
they're said that they're going to be punished for it, which to me reminded me of Legolem, how there's a whole subplot towards the end of the film about how some of the people who are on trial, some of the people who are in trouble, didn't even do anything. Like, they were innocent, and our characters have to go plead to have them not punished.
Right. Which in that film's case was very much, very likely a commentary on certain things happening at the time.
Right. But no, as this goes on, we get this chase sequence with Kogenta that ends with him getting captured. And then this is where we have our young villager go up to pray for the god to help him and help his family, right?
Mm-hmm. What, Motsuki's kid?
Yes.
Take, I want to say his name was? Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Right. And when he ends up meeting with the priestess and informs her that Kogenta has been captured, Tadafumi ends up overhearing this and goes to sneak off into the village to rescue Kogenta.
Which ends up with him getting captured as well. We also see some of Kogenta getting tortured.
I will say the sequence of him sneaking into the village to try and rescue Kogenta is legitimately quite a well done and suspenseful sequence.
Yeah, the way it's very closely shot, like it's all very close up, and you don't get to see a lot of the frame outside of him moving. I thought that was really genius.
And if I remember right, there's not a lot of music in the scene as well, so you're hearing like every sound being made from like the movement of the dirt and stuff. Like, it's good stuff.
Yeah, no, this was very, very suspenseful. I felt that as well. And then at the very end here, we get the reveal that Koifume, did I say that name right? Tadafumi,
yeah. I was confused who you were talking about.
That Tadafumi has fallen into the trap of our villains, and now him and Kogenta are both in danger. And then we also, during this whole sequence, we go see the kid who has been told not to go into the forest as that's forbidden, going into the forest. Right.
Where he seemingly sees a lot of potential supernatural like entities, but maybe not. It's not really clear if they're real or not.
I love this haunted forest sequence. It actually reminded me a lot.
I think it's really cool.
It reminded me of Throne of Blood a little bit, with how they did the whole haunted forest thing.
I loved the horror scenes in Throne of Blood.
But in Daimajin, they do a lot of stuff that would later show up again in 100 Monsters, because there's a haunted forest sequence in that film as well. And I thought that was really interesting, but I did question, like, why is it just the kid who has these visions? Like, nobody else in their journey through the haunted forest has that issue.
Right. I wasn't entirely sure on the motive behind it, but regardless, I still thought it was a cool sequence regardless of that. But yeah, I did question that a little bit.
But it does make for a good sequence. I do love it. Again, the horror elements of Daimajin are really good.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually he makes it up to the mountain where he sees Kozasa and he starts praying to her.
Yeah, thinking she's a spirit at first.
And there are a few very small moments of comedy in this film just to kind of lighten the mood a little bit. And this was one of those, and I thought it was very well done.
Yeah, I mean, it's generally pretty natural and fits in the story.
Mm-hmm. Now, after all of this, like we're obviously building up to the big finale, right?
Yeah.
And at this point, like we're 40-ish minutes into the film?
Yeah, 40, 45 minutes, something like that.
So there's only about 35 minutes left.
35 minutes left, yeah.
Which is pretty good. You know, at this point in the film, at least, it doesn't feel like to me that it's really drug on, you know?
No. I mean, it is a pretty short film, especially by modern standards.
Right. But it's not our shortest film we've covered, and some of the films we have covered that are shorter feel a lot longer.
True. That is true.
Now, after all this, we get a really intense sequence of the priestess, Shinobu, going to Samanosuke to talk about where he's failing at, which is pleasing the Majin, right?
Right. And warns him that if he doesn't lead, his greed will lead to the awakening of the Majin and end in his death at its hands.
And I love this sequence because it kind of goes with the whole, like, the modernizing of Japan. You lose the faith or lose the culture, the tradition, which is something that, you know, Samanosuke and the Hanabusa clan, like those two clans are so different because of that. You know, the Hanabusa clan endures and embraces the culture, the traditions of the village, whereas Samanosuke is renovating it. Like he's literally destroying the area to build a new gate, to build new buildings.
Right. And I love the end of the sequence when Samanosuke attempts to kill the priestess, and then the lighting shifts as she almost curses him in a sense.
Yes. I've seen some people even suggest that this is why Daimajin wakes up, which I think it's very obvious that it's not this, but they do a great job here. Like everything, it's a very theatrical moment. As soon as the sword slices her, the lighting goes from you can see everything to darkness except for the characters on screen.
Right.
Which is a very Japanese horror thing to do. And allow me to propose an idea for where they might have got some of their influences. A lot of the stuff in this film, specifically the artistic side, reminds me of the 1965 film Kwaidan, which was an adaptation of the Lafcadio Hearn book. Actually, it was 1964, not 1965. Masuke Kobayashi's Kwaidan. Because in that film,
from what I understand, that's a very popular film from that era, so it very well could have been a big influence.
Because like some of the skies end up being very bright, but also like off-putting and kind of upsetting. And there's elements of like where everything goes dark in moments of like dread and whatnot. And there's some really, truly beautiful moments. And it's very theatrical throughout the film. And I can't help but wonder if some of that does find its way into Daimajin, because Kwaidan was very popular. I think it ended up getting some foreign press. I think it went to Cannes, if I remember correctly, which was something Dai Kyoto was all about because of, Rashomon, Ugetsu, Gate of Hell, like all of these films like were popular foreign like masterpieces.
Man, you reminded me of the fact that I really should get around to watching Qui-Gon.
You should. I love Qui-Gon. It's genuinely Qui-Gon's one of my favorite Japanese films.
Someday. Someday.
I also love going back to the sequence where we see the priestess die. She doesn't die with one swipe. She dies with multiple.
She dies from about 4.
Yeah.
4 or 5.
And this whole sequence, again, it's very theatrical, not only in the lighting, but the acting. The acting suddenly becomes more kabuki in how big
and very
it is.
Exaggerated. Yes, yes.
Which is something that, for the most part, this film does not do. There are elements of that because it is Japanese. It is traditional Japanese acting. That kabuki play acting is going to bleed in a little bit, especially in your samurai chambara films. I see that a lot in those. But this sequence specifically, they get very over-exaggerated, and it's beautiful.
Right.
And the moment she dies, and I love this, the moment she dies, everything goes back to color. But you can see the fear and in our villain's eyes. Like, you can tell that while he doesn't believe her, there is a part of him that's questioning what he's doing. And that's why he then sends for his men to destroy the statue, because he doesn't want to take that chance anymore. And I think it's really brilliantly set up. I think this is a great way to move the story along. And at this point, when you think about it, our last character at the home at the mountain, Kozasa, the priestess is dead. Her brother is in prison, and so is Kogenta. She is all alone. And I think that's a beautiful way to set her up as now she has to fight on her own, which then gives her, honestly, some of the best moments in the film. That it really gives her a lot of power, and I love that. Because she goes from being this kind of side character that doesn't do a whole lot to suddenly she's very important. She fills that role the priestess had. And it's kind of hinted at, I think, that she will take on that mantle. Which, I mean, they do that even at the beginning of the film, whenever the priestess takes her and Kogenta takes her brother. Kind of like they're the mentors for the two kids.
I mean, I thought it was interesting that the film doesn't... Kazasa's probably the closest thing this film has to a protagonist, but I wouldn't say there's really...
a set
one singular character you can call the protagonist throughout the entirety of the runtime.
Right. It's kind of an ensemble of these 4 characters.
Yeah.
Because there are moments where, like, Kogenta will disappear, and it'll be Kozasa, or it'll be Shinobu.
Tadafumi.
Tadafumi. And it's like... But then, like, when Tadafumi and Kogenta are in jail... they're kind of irrelevant until they get freed
until
at
the climax.
Yeah.
And
it's Kozasa and Shinobu, but then Shinobu dies, so it's Kogasa.
Kazasa and the boy Take.
Mm-hmm. And Take's an interesting character too, because we see him at the very beginning, and he, by all technicalities, if we're going to use the term, he's the Kenny of the film. But he's
in a sense, yeah.
But he there is not a single point in this film where it's like, oh God, here we go again. Like, he's a great character. I think he's a great side character for Kozasa to bounce off of. And I think, honestly, this whole the characters in this film, I think, are really good. I think they're all memorable and like have those memorable moments all pretty thoroughly throughout the film.
I mean, the thing is, I think they're all good and they're all likable, but I feel like there's not, because of the short runtime, there's not a huge amount to really chew on with these characters as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I really couldn't tell you too much about them personality-wise outside of, like, they're just a general description of the character, like, oh, these Kazasa and Tadafumi are the kids whose father are the son and daughter of a lord. Kogenta is the servant that selflessly decides to protect and raise the children and become their mentor.
But and to add to your point, he gets captured very easily. That's one thing I did notice is he gets captured pretty easily, despite the fact that like he's avoided them for 10 years. And I did notice that some of these characters just kind of like very obviously have elements to them that are just kind of underdeveloped.
Right.
Our two main characters, they feel like they should have more of a emotional background, but I will say throughout the bulk of the film, they seem pretty shallow. And even like Shinobu, she kind of fills that. I'm trying to think. That's an archetype. I'm trying to remember what archetype or what film I'm thinking of specifically, where there's like the priest character that ends up getting killed because of their beliefs. But I can't think of it off the top of my head.
I mean, in a sense, she's also a mentor figure for Kozasa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because Kozasa essentially takes her role. And, you know, I think another thing, too, is, you know, as an example, going to, like, the Hidden Fortress. At the end of that film, we see what happens after the events that transpired, right? The princess becomes the princess.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas here, as soon as the film wraps up, it's over. We don't see what happens. We don't get a, like, 10 years later, you know, we have our characters like thriving and the village is happy. Like, we don't get that. There is no payoff at the very end.
Right. But I will say, to the sort of folklore aspect of this film, in a way, the shallow characters almost kind of adds to that feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like with a lot of folklore, they usually teach like moral lessons. In this film's case, it's a warning against greed and oppression, and so that the characters are more just in service of that, and the story are more in service of that theme rather than necessarily being characters that are supposed to be like terribly well developed.
Right, which makes
so
sense.
In that sense, I think it works.
Yeah, and that would explain.
Think the film gets away with it.
And that would explain some of the more theatrical elements too. You know, it's like in Kwaidan, it is stories that Lafcadio Hearn has heard, and you actually see him writing these stories down in the film.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the way it plays out seems like it's a Japanese folklore story. You know, the story of what happens when you don't appease the mighty Majin, you know?
Yeah.
Which is something that absolutely would happen in a story in Japanese folklore. You know, there's legitimately a story called Hyaku Monogatari. Hyaku
Monogatari.
Yes, which is the whole concept of you have to tell 100 stories about ghosts, or else if you break the tradition, you're going to be visited by one. So it absolutely seems like something that would happen in a Japanese folklore tale of, you know, the Majin.
And that sort of mood that the film has, I think, is honestly just one of the strongest aspects of the film, and is something that really stood out to me on this rewatch.
I guess how many times have you seen this movie, Rex?
I've only seen this once before. Back
Gotcha.
when I first got the Arrow set, I popped it in and I thought it was all right. Like, I thought it was good, but I didn't really think too much of it back then.
Gotcha. See, I had seen it twice before. I want to say twice or three times. One on DVD, many years ago, one on the Arrow video set, and then like listening to the audio commentary. So I had only seen it a handful of times prior.
But yeah, jumping back into the film, whilst Kogenta and Tadafumi are still captured, Samanosuke sends Gunjiro to destroy the statue.
Right.
During which they get lost and end up finding the Princess Kozasa and the kid, forcing them to take the group to the statue.
And then from here, and this whole sequence is beautiful. Like, we get them interacting with the giant statue. They get high up on it. They start bashing it with these hammers, which ends up not doing anything. So suddenly they're like, we need to like hammer a nail through the head, which is kind of weird. It's kind of like, where did this come from? Like, it just kind of shows up out of nowhere. But during all of this, the lighting is really eerie. If I remember correctly, it's very yellow. It's very
yellow, and again, the framing is really.
You're always looking up
deliberate.
to the statue.
Yeah, and again, going back to that painting idea I mentioned earlier, like a lot of the shots in this scene, I feel like are something that you could imagine like a picture book or a set of paintings.
Mm-hmm.
Like telling this story,
right?
Showing you these pictures.
In the Arrow booklet, there's on the cover, there's a Matt Frank piece where it looks kind of like traditional Japanese art with the Majin sitting in its, which
right,
like
and that's on the mountain, right?
Yeah, that's taken from the first Daimajin, one of those establishing wide shots, and it looks natural. It looks like something you would see in a Japanese painting. But I must say, the moment they start hitting the nail into the head and the blood starts dripping, oh my god, that's beautiful. That's so genius. Because as soon as that happens, everything goes wrong for this team.
Oh yeah, Daimajin summons a thunderstorm. The
earthquakes.
Earth starts splitting apart.
And they use some like really intense lighting in here. There's like some major like yellow lights that just show up in blue lights that like don't really have a reason to be there except for the cool factor. It just helps
add the dramatic effect.
Yes. And again, it's like you said, like a painting. It's very artistic. It's very theatrical. This whole sequence, like the earth opens up just to swallow everybody and then shut.
Right, and if I remember right, there's the Earth, like when it opens up, there's like either a green or a red light?
I think it's green, because the sky turns darker. It's more of a red.
But yeah, this scene is really cool.
Yeah, no, I love the deaths here. I think the deaths are really good.
And again, you really get that real godlike feel from Daimajin. You really understand why the villagers really respected this being.
Right, and the fact that like he can manipulate the world around him, which we see that again later on in the sequence after everybody's dead. Like Daimajin can just manipulate whatever he wants. He can appear and disappear from wherever.
Right. I mean, he can like turn into a little ball that flies, and at the end of the film, his spirit ends up leaving the statue to move on elsewhere.
So I do, and I love, and I really think they do a great job at establishing the god aspect of Daimajin.
Yeah, and I think that's something that really helps, in terms of like the kaiju subgenre. I think that really helps set Daimajin apart from Godzilla, Gamera, and various other films of the 60s Daikaiju cinema.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about it, how much I appreciate and love the inclusion of the Odo Island superstitions in Godzilla 54. This is a lot like that, but on a whole nother level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is a legitimate deity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it does a great job. And we even see that this god is aware enough that he protects Kozasa and the boy from getting swallowed, from getting killed, from getting hurt. And I think that's a really cool touch as well.
Yeah, but after defeating these villains, Daimajin once again returns to rest until Kozasa pleads to the god to help spare the lives of her brother and Kogenta, whom are going to be executed in the morning. She begs the monster and ultimately attempts to even sacrifice her own life to prove herself, in a sense, to the margin.
Right, which I will say this part kind of just moved a little too fast. Because she runs over, she begs, she pleads, it doesn't work. A teardrop falls. We don't get the establishment that the teardrop is what wakes Daimajin. And then she decides to just go to the waterfall, and then we get the back and forth fight between her and the kid. And then Daimajin shows up. It's like, okay. This sequence is a little weird, but it could just simply be because you just came off of a perfect sequence.
To me, it almost felt almost a little redundant. It felt like, so Daimajin woke up already. Oh no, we're backtracking a bit.
Yes, I agree. 100% there. It's like, okay, so what would have worked better here is as soon as everybody died, like Daimajin would have woken up. Like, to think that that's him just slumbering and then he wakes up and then he goes on his rampage. I feel like that would just flow a little bit better.
Right. That's pretty much how I felt. Because it almost feels like we go through two separate sequences of waking him up.
Mm-hmm. But I will say, here we get the first instance of Daimajin changing, which is where he, of course, runs his fists up and we get the crossfade to the actual Daimajin face.
Right.
And it's important to note the suit actor here decided to not ever blink, which is a really cool, like, subtle thing. But I
think there's a couple moments where he does blink a little bit, but, like, honestly, I can't blame the guy, given, like, his eyes were bloodshot from the potato dust that they were throwing in his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much the entirety of the Daimajin scenes.
Yeah. Now, right after this awakening, we see Daimajin flying around in his little white bubble and then just shows up at the village. And again, we're going to talk about this. The red... So actually before that, we go back to the executions. They're about to execute our two of our main characters, but a attempted
revolt happens from the villages,
which is such a jarring sequence to me, because it's like it starts and then it stops and then they go on with the execution and then Daimajin show. It just feels a little repetitive. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think this, like, 5-minute sequences, this 5-minute slot with the second awakening of Daimajin and the revolt is probably the only stuff in the film where it's like, okay, do you really need that? Could you just cut that? But it's only like 5 minutes, so it's not like it lingers on too long.
No.
To be honest, it's, if that's all that lingers, like, you don't even notice it until you break it down and talk about it.
Yeah, and even like on a first watch, I feel like you're not going to be really taking too much issue with this.
Right. And then after the revolt, they start the execution again. And then Daimajin shows up with his little white ball, which they don't really explain, whatever. I want to say it's like that spirit. It's a yokai thing. I think.
I really don't think it needs explanation. I don't think it needs one at all, honestly.
That's just what it looked like to me, because, like, in the yokai films, there's that little ball of fire that kind of shows up.
See, I've never seen
spirits.
them, so I wouldn't know.
Oh. The Onbi, so the Onibi is demon fire. So it's a it's a dangerous type of fireball yokai. They, let me see here what it says. They're typically blue or blue-white, which in Daimajin it is kind of that bluish white.
I mean, it admitted a green light on the guards below.
Oh, that is true.
At last, in the final 10 minutes of the film, we finally get Daimajin's rampage, and it is a spectacle to behold.
Right, we get, bringing it up again, we get the red skies with the gray clouds. It's very painting-like. It reminds me again of Qui-Gon. It's very beautiful. The miniature destruction here is so detailed, and it's because Daimajin is not that much taller than a human.
Right.
So,
I mean, they had a full-size model of Daimajin that was about 4.5 meters tall.
And so we get some really detailed destruction sequences, and the way they film it, which is all very close up, it's everything's filling the frame. It's really good, like genuinely.
Oh yeah, it looks fantastic. Like, the only shots that stand out are just the composite shots with the rough around the edges blue screen. Like, that's
right.
The only issue I take with this.
This whole sequence
and maybe at a couple. I don't think this is necessarily this is a nitpick, but like sometimes the full scale Daimajin, I think they edit around it pretty well, so it's pretty seamless when it's the suit and when it's the full scale model. But sometimes there's a couple moments where you can tell, like, the eyes they're very clearly not as detailed as the suit actor's eyes, and then the arm kind of is a little limp in certain shots. But like, genuinely, other than those small issues, like, this sequence looks great.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things I love is just how immobile Daimajin looks throughout all of it. They end up throwing rocks at him with catapults, and he just kind of stands there.
They just bounce off him.
And I love, now granted, the footprints, the footsteps are kind of inconsistent. I will criticize that. It's like inconsistent when they'll sound heavy and when they're just silent. But I get why. It would just sound really obnoxious if you get boom, 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 like without a break.
Mm-hmm.
But I did think it was a little jarring to not have them.
I don't know. I don't think it really stood out to me. So I don't know. Maybe if I was paying more attention to it, but as is, I think it worked. I think it worked the way it is in the film, honestly.
The atmosphere as well, which that was something they focused on, was getting a decent atmosphere in these sequences. I love it. I love the flying debris. I love the additional, like, particles in the air. It looks really good. There's a lot of detail and a lot of destruction here that it's so good. It really and honestly is.
Right. And the miniature, and because of Daimajin's small size, you do really feel the scale of the destruction. Like, these miniatures feel they were big in comparison to, because in this film they're done at 1 out of 2.5 scale, compared to like the typical scale for Toho film, like the Godzilla series was about 1/25th scale. For a lot of the Showa films, and then later it would go to like 1/50th scale for like the Heisei films, I want to say. And so by comparison, their size, really, you feel it in this film. You really do feel it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like, there is not a moment in this film, I thought, where any of the effects did not feel heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And like, even one of the bad guys, one of the villains, ends up getting stepped on. And you can kind of feel it in his reaction, like how heavy it is. And I thought that was just so cool. There's some really cool, like, deaths here, especially for our main villain.
Oh yeah, where he gets crucified. That is absolutely awesome.
Yeah, and it's kind of shocking because I honestly, thinking about how this was paired up with a Gamera film kind of shocks me.
Right. I mean, this film, like watching it, to me, it doesn't really scream children's film. And obviously, as stated before, they weren't necessarily, they wanted adults to be able to enjoy it. But honestly, outside of some of the simplicity of the plot, you'd kind of think from the outset that, yeah, this is more of an adult oriented film if you didn't know the context of it being like associated with the Gamera series in the double feature with Barugon.
Mm-hmm. And especially like the whole idea of like the cheerful nature of like a Gamera film, that doesn't even show here, because after our villain's dead, you would think, okay, so Daimajin will go away, everything will be fine, right? Daimajin then
he continues his rampage.
Yeah, he starts hurting the villagers. He destroys the buildings that are in this village. Like, he's not protecting anybody. And then Kozasa offers her life after Tadafumi tries to like stop him, and he just gets dragged along. And our kid decides to try and get involved. That's when Kozasa tries to do her part, offering her life, crying, only for the mighty Majin to then turn into a pile of dust.
Yeah, and the spirit moves on.
And then the movie ends. It's kind of an abrupt ending, but like you said, it kind of falls in line with the whole storytelling thing.
Right. But also, I mean, in that, this was the 60s, a lot of films of this time had fairly, when the main climactic action was over, that was just when the film ended.
Right. And that's it. Do you have any final thoughts, Rex, on Daimajin?
Well, just pretty simply put, this is a very, very entertaining kaiju-esque twist on the jidaigeki genre that is, simple but very easy to watch and enjoy. I almost feel like I don't have enough. I should have more to say on it, but yeah, visually it's absolutely gorgeous. But I don't know why. Strangely enough, I just haven't had a lot. I noticed when I was watching the film that I didn't have many notes while writing other than "this is cool."
Right. No, that was something I kind of struggled with on my first viewing, my commentary viewing, and all of that was simply, and honestly on my third viewing as well, was I almost feel like there's nothing I can really say.
I mean, I wonder if it's just the fact that like you and I are less acquainted with Chanbara films and jidaigekis where compared to the typical modern set kaiju films.
Right.
I wonder if that plays into it, I suppose.
It could. My interaction, my interest in that doesn't venture very much farther from I've seen Seven Samurai, The Hidden Fortress, Throne of Blood, and Yojimbo.
Right.
I will say this is one of the rare jidaigeki films of the kaiju genre. The others that also are of the same genre, of course, Return of Daimajin, Wrath of Daimajin, but also like The Magic Serpent or The Three Treasures. I've only seen The Magic Serpent, but I very much think Daimajin does a way better job, and I think that is really attributed to the team at Daiei Kyoto that really showed up Daiei Tokyo in every sense of the word.
Oh yeah, it's a wonderful film, and I'm like, even though I don't have a whole, I feel like I should have more to say on it. I definitely found myself appreciating the film a lot more on this watch compared to the first time I saw it, where I just kind of watched it more casually and was like, yeah, this is all right. This is fine. I guess I like this.
See, part of me wonders if this is one of those films that's just so good it's kind of like Godzilla 54, where it's like, okay, what can you really bring to the table?
Yeah, I guess, maybe.
I don't know. But I definitely enjoy this movie, and I would say if you haven't seen it,
to watching the sequels now.
yeah. Now, Rex, do you have anything else you want to say, or do you want me to go into our cast and crew?
Feel free to go ahead.
Right, starting with our crew this time, Kimiyoshi Yasuda, the director, worked on Suzuno Suke Akado Defeat the Demon-Faced Gang, Susuno Suke Akado The Vacuum Slash of Atsuka, Suzuno Suke Akado The One-Legged Demon, Yokai Monsters 100 Monsters, Yokai Monsters Along with Ghosts, and Return of Daimajin. Tetsuo Yoshida, the writer, worked on Suzuno Suke Akano, The Invisible Demon, Return of Daimajin, Wrath of Daimajin, Yokai Monsters 100 Monsters, Yokai Monsters Spook Warfare, Yokai Monsters Along with Ghosts, Invisible Swordsman, Tokaido Ghost Journey. Your composer was Akira Ifukube, who worked on Godzilla, Rodan, The Mysterians, Varan, The Three Treasures, Battle in Outer Space, The Whale God, King Kong vs. Godzilla, Atragon, Mothra vs. Godzilla, Dogora, The War of the Gargantuas, Return of Daimajin, Invasion of Astro Monster, Ghidorah, The Three-Headed Monster, Frankenstein vs. Baragon, Wrath of Daimajin, King Kong Escapes, Destroy All Monsters, Latitude Zero, Space Amoeba, Godzilla vs. Gigan, Terror of Mechagodzilla, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, Godzilla vs. Mothra, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, and Godzilla vs. Destroya.
I think I preferred last time when you were just like, we know who Ifukube is.
Masashi Nagata, the producer, who worked on... Masashi Nagata, producer, worked on Rashomon, Warning from Space, Buddha, Gamera the Giant Monster, Gamera vs. Barugon, Return of Daimajin, Wrath of Daimajin, Conflagration, The Snake Girl and the Silver-Haired Witch, Gamera vs. Viras, Yokai Monsters 100 Monsters, The Snow Woman, Kaiden Otanashi, Yokai Monsters Spook Warfare, Gamera vs. Guiron, Yokai Monsters Along with Ghosts, Gamera vs. Jiger, The Ghost of Kasane. Now, contrary to what it says in the credits, from what I've heard, the actual director of effects was Fujiro Morita. So I went and I found his
cinematographer.
Apparently, he was also director of special effects. Some sources say that he actually did the effects directing.
I mean, so Kuroda, from what I understand, was still, at the very least, heavily involved effects-wise.
He was heavily involved, so I have both of them here. For Morita's tokusatsu work, he also worked on Return of Daimajin and Wrath of Daimajin. Yoshiyuki Kuroda, who is credited as director of special effects, worked on Return of Daimajin, Wrath of Daimajin, Yokai Monsters 100 Monsters, which he also directed, Yokai Monsters Along with Ghosts, which he also directed, Yokai Monsters Spook Warfare, which he also directed, Invisible Swordsman, which he also directed, and episodes of Mirror Man, Jumborg Ace, and Monkey. As for your cast, Miwa Takada, who played Kozasa Hanabuse, was in Yokai Monsters 100 Monsters. Yoshihiko Aoyama, who played Tadafumi Hanabusa, was in Yokai Monster Spook Warfare, The Curse of the Ghost, which is also known as Yotsuya Kaiden, The Ghost of Oewa. Jun Fujimaki, who played Kogenta Suramaru, was in Yokai Monsters 100 Monsters, Dengeki Sentai Changeman, Dengeki Sentai Changeman Shuttle Base Close Call, Godzilla vs. Destroya, and Japanese masterpiece Ghost Stories Theater. Ryotaro Gome, who played Samanosuke, was in Yokai Monsters 100 Monsters and Yokai Monsters Along with Ghosts. Ryuzo Shimida, who played Tadakio Hanabusa, was in Ghost Story Depth of Kasane and Buddha. Saburo Date, who played Ippei, was in Yokai Monsters Along with Ghosts and The Bullet Train. Chikara Hashimoto, who was Daimajin, worked on The Whale God, Return of Daimajin, Wrath of Daimajin, Gamera vs. Viras, Yokai Monster Spook Warfare, Ghost Story The Pitfall, Ghost Story The Edge of the Earth, and Tetsuo Endo, who played Inogami Gonjiro, was in Legend of Eight Samurai, Audition, and Kyoto Yokai Map. And that's our cast and crew. So, Rex, I think we're down to just one thing in the episode before we transition to the most noblest of podcasting traditions.
And I believe that would be our rankings, would it not?
Yes. Now, we haven't covered the other two Daimajin films or Great Yokai War Guardians, so we're not going to rank the Daimajin films yet.
Right.
But we can do Daikaiju month rankings. So we're in our third week. We have 3. We just have one more, and we'll have our rankings.
Right.
So, Rex, what is at your number 3 spot?
See, this is actually difficult, and I've been sitting here still trying to decide, going back and forth between my number 3 and my number 2 in this. But I think I'm just narrowly going to put the Whale God at number 3 by a very, very small margin.
See, for me, this wasn't very difficult. For me, it was at number 3, I have Gamera versus Barugon.
Mm-hmm.
And I should say, anybody who's listening, if you've made it through this far, you should absolutely go check out our other episodes on Gamera the Giant Monster, Gamera versus Barugon, and the Whale God. And we also did the Snake Girl and the Silver-Haired Witch. I highly recommend checking out all of those Dai titles, just so you can watch and get more Dai information.
But what would you have at your number 2 spot?
At my number 2, again, very easy for me. I've got the Whale God.
See, at number 2, I've got Daimajin.
Oh my god.
Hey, I think I like all 3 of the films in this ranking. Yeah, I want to say this is thus far the only themed month we've done where currently I've liked every film we've done or we've covered. Unless maybe one of our first ones that was maybe the horror one we did it. I think we might have liked mostly everything. I don't remember.
We did Ju-on, we did Ring, we did Matango, and the Snake Girl and the Silver-Haired Witch.
Then yeah, I guess we liked all of those then.
Yeah. So, I'm going to be honest here. Well, okay, so you said you're number 2, right?
Yeah, Daimajin.
So my number 1 is Daimajin. I do not get your thought process here. Like you said that you've liked all 3. To be honest, I've only liked 2 of the 3. Maybe I'm not a Gamera fan. Maybe that's what it is. Gamera versus Barugon does not do it for me. Now, I did get a message from somebody. And they said, I can't stand Barugon. It's so boring. So I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one.
Hey, I can understand finding the kaiju stuff boring. But come on, the drama stuff's entertaining.
I'm not.
I think it's a breezy watch. I was shocked how quickly that hour and 40 minutes went by. I was genuinely shocked.
I'm not.
I was worried it was gonna be a bit of a slog, but honestly, it went by so fast. So it's just on that pure entertainment value. That's why I've got Barugon at number 1 at the moment. I will say I think Daimajin, out of the 3 films we've covered, I feel like Daimajin is the most consistent in quality throughout the entire runtime. Overall,
I don't see how you could put Daimajin below
I just found
Barugon.
Barugon a little more entertaining.
You're crazy.
Maybe you just hate giant monsters or something. I don't know.
Maybe I do. Maybe I'm not a giant monster fan.
Yeah, maybe you hate Gamera and Godzilla. Maybe you hate all those guys. You just what do the kids these days call it? You're a hater. Is that it?
Yeah, I'm a hater. I don't know what to say to that. Well, with that, Rex, do you want to transition into the most noblest of podcasting traditions?
Why, sure.
Well, I'll start us off by saying hello. I'm Elijah, and I have a Kaiju and Tokusatsu problem. Joking aside, I am Elijah Thomas. I am a part of the rotating hosts for Monsters with Attitude. You can check us out on YouTube, where we do monthly live streams talking Kaiju entertainment. You can also head over to Facebook and join our Facebook group. It's a great place to talk with like-minded people. I'm also a writer. I've written for GodzillaMovies.com and in Kaiju Ramen magazine. I currently write for Kaiju United, and it's a lot of fun. My writing has also been featured in the book Giant Bug Cinema, a Monster Kid's Guide from Bear Manor Media, where I wrote about Ghidorah, the threaded monster. Outside of writing and podcasting, I also served as a consultant on the upcoming Titanic Creations officially licensed Younguri action figure. Go to titanicreations.com/Younguri to order yours today. I've also had the privilege to produce bonus features for SRS Cinema. I've worked on Yuzo, the Biggest Battle in Tokyo, Liverleaf, and I'm working on the upcoming release of War of the Ninja Monsters, Jiron vs. Gora. All of these are on Blu-ray, so you can order them on Blu-ray at srscinema.com. I'm also a filmmaker and YouTuber. You can check out my stuff on my YouTube channel, ET13 Productions, where you can see some of my short films and older YouTube videos, along with an ever-growing playlist that features all of my appearances on YouTube. I do plan on getting some of my older short films on there soon, so definitely check that out. I also appeared in a kaiju movie, a little-known film called Zillafoot from 2021. I made a brief cameo in the film as Skywatcher number 2. It's got a rating of 3.7 out of 10 on IMDb, so if you want to watch more kaiju, you can also buy the Blu-ray on srscinema.com or the DVD from any major online retailer, or just watch it for free on Tubi with ads, or go buy it on Amazon Prime. You can also check out my action figure photography on my Instagram at ET13_productions, and my ex, the artist formerly known as Twitter, thanks Danny, at the same handle. Now, Rex, where can people find you at?
Well, dear listeners, you can find me on YouTube at RexXeno, on Twitter at Rex_Xenomorph, and on Instagram, Rex_Xeno. And if you want to check out some of my writing, go take a look at the Tokusatsu Network.
And as for the podcast, don't forget to rate us on iTunes. That boosts our ratings and helps us get recommended to more people just like you. If you don't have an Apple device, which I don't blame you, that's a lie. I'm reading this off of a MacBook right now. But you can rate us on Spotify. To stay up to date with all things Kaiju Conversation related, head over to www.kaijuconversation.com to find our episodes, social media, news, and updates. Follow us on Twitter at KAIJU_CONVERS. If you don't have Twitter, you can follow us on Instagram or like us on Facebook at the same handle. If you're like me before podcasting and you don't have any social media, lucky you! You can email us at kaijuconversation@gmail.com, all lowercase, all one word, you know the drill. And as always, we'll read your reviews on air for everyone to hear. We also have a Teespring store. Eventually we'll have original artwork on there, but until then you can sport our awesome logo on a t-shirt or maybe even a coffee mug. If you'd like to chat with us, check out our Discord server full of others that have similar interests to you. Most recently in our Discord server, it looks like there was a conversation on Ultraman Rising, the most recent Ultraman movie that was released on Netflix. It's a great community full of great people. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you can be notified anytime we upload a video. We sometimes post exclusives to the channel like bloopers for episodes or minisodes talking about news or other subjects. We also have an interview with Mechagodzilla designer Jared Krichevsky on the channel. I definitely butchered his name. I'm so sorry about that. And a huge thanks to Rex for editing all of these episodes and all the other content we upload. His links can be found in the description below. Along with Rex, we'd like to give a huge thanks and shout out to Danny DiManna of the Godzilla Novelization Project for his amazing vocals on our theme song. You can support him by following him on Twitter at Danzilla93_GNP or visit his website, GodzillaNovelizationProject.com. And a huge thanks to Grattan Conwell from the podcast Giant Monster BS for composing the music for our theme song. You can support him by following the podcast on Twitter at Giant Monster BS or on any podcast platform under the name Giant Monster BS. And with that, we're going to wrap things up here. So thank you guys so much for listening. We are just one episode away from wrapping up Daikaiju month. Another July done. After next episode, Rex, we're going to be at episode 100.
No. Nah, not real. I refuse to
One
believe.
more Daikaiju episode, and then 100.
Not
It's
real.
all downhill from here now, right?
Surely.
Surely. Like, we're going to climax at whatever next episode is.
Surely.
But again, thank you guys so much for listening. And as always, please remember, life's too short to not talk big. Bye, guys.
Bye.
We are set, we are in debt. There's nothing to sweat. Life's too short now, baby. And not too big now, baby. Conversation. His name's Elijah, baby. And also Rex now, baby. We love those kaiju, baby. And you will too now.